Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. Queen Zephyra of the Celestial Dominion had perfected the art of regal indifference over her 8 years on the throne, maintaining an expression of cool detachment even when ordering the execution of enemy commanders. It was a skill that had served her well during 3 years of intergalactic war, allowing her to make the hard decisions that kept her people alive while their enemies sought to destroy everything the Celestials had built over millennia. The throne room gleamed with the crystalline architecture that marked celestial design, walls that seemed to grow from living gemstone, surfaces that reflected light in patterns that hurt human eyes to observe directly. Zephyra sat upon the throne of stars, carved from a single massive sapphire that pulsed with the heartbeat of her homeworld, her appearance as coldly beautiful as the chamber itself. "Bring forward the next prisoner," she commanded, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance that marked her species' royal bloodline. The war against the human colonies had produced a steady stream of captives, and each required her personal attention according to celestial law. Most were processed quickly, interrogated for military intelligence, then either executed or consigned to labor camps depending on their perceived value. It was grim work, but necessary for the survival of her people in a galaxy where humans seemed determined to claim every habitable world for themselves. "Your Majesty," Lord Commander Thane announced with the formal precision that had made him her most trusted military advisor, Captain Alex Morrison of the Terran Defense Force, captured during the assault on Kepler Prime. The guards dragged forward a human male who looked to be in his early 40s, wearing the tattered remains of a Terran military uniform. He'd clearly been in the fight of his life. His face bore fresh bruises, and his dark hair was streaked with blood from a scalp wound. But despite his condition, he held himself with the dignity of someone who refused to be broken by circumstance. Zephyra began her customary assessment, cataloging details that might prove useful during interrogation. Average human height, muscular build suggesting military conditioning, brown eyes that showed intelligence rather than fear. Nothing particularly remarkable about this specimen, though his rank suggested he might possess strategic information worth. The human raised his head to meet her gaze, and Zephyra felt her carefully maintained composure shatter like crystal struck by sound. 20 years collapsed in an instant as she recognized the face that had haunted her memory since her youth. The features were older now, hardened by time and responsibility, but the eyes were unmistakably the same, kind, determined, belonging to the young security officer who had saved her life when she was merely Princess Zephyra, stranded and terrified on a neutral trading station. Her breath caught in her throat, a reaction so visible that several court members shifted uneasily in their positions. Queens of the Celestial Dominion did not show surprise, did not reveal emotion, did not demonstrate anything that might be interpreted as weakness before enemy prisoners. "Your Majesty," Lord Commander Thane inquired, his tone carrying just enough concern to remind Zephyra that her behavior was being closely observed. Zephyra struggled to regain her composure, forcing her expression back into the mask of royal indifference that had become second nature. "This prisoner appears to be of higher value than initially assessed. I will conduct his interrogation personally." The human, Alex, though she couldn't let herself think of him by name, studied her face with the same intensity she was struggling to hide. But there was no recognition in his eyes, which made perfect sense. The celestial transformation that had elevated her to the throne had altered her appearance dramatically, changing her from the frightened young alien he'd once helped into the imposing figure of divine authority she now presented. He didn't know her. But she knew him, remembered every detail of their brief encounter with perfect clarity. The way he'd stepped between her and the Zentari assassins without hesitation. The gentle tone he'd used to calm her panic. The refusal to accept any reward beyond knowing she was safe. "Clear the throne room," Zephyra commanded, her voice carrying the authority that made disobedience unthinkable. "I will question this prisoner alone." "Your Majesty," Princess Liana interjected from her position near the throne, "is that wise? Human prisoners have been known to attempt assassination when given the opportunity. Are you questioning my ability to defend myself, sister?" Zephyra asked with the dangerous quietness that preceded royal displeasure. "Of course not, Your Majesty, Lyanna replied quickly, though her expression suggested she would remember this breach of protocol. I merely thought. You thought incorrectly, Zephyra cut her off. Clear the room. Now. As the court filed out with the rustling of ceremonial robes and the soft chiming of jewelry, Zephyra remained motionless on her throne, watching Alex with eyes that she hoped revealed nothing of the chaos in her mind. The guards had chained him to the interrogation post in the center of the chamber, but she knew those restraints were purely ceremonial. If he was the same man she remembered, he would make no attempt to harm her even if given the opportunity. When the massive doors sealed with the crystalline resonance that marked celestial security systems, Zephyra allowed herself to truly look at him for the first time since his identity had struck her like a plasma bolt to the chest. Captain Morrison, she said carefully, testing how his name felt on her tongue after 20 years of silence. Your Majesty, Alex replied with the respectful tone that suggested he understood the gravity of his situation, even if he didn't understand why she dismissed her entire court for a private interrogation. Zephyra rose from her throne with the fluid grace that her people had evolved over millennia of life in low-gravity environments. She descended the crystal steps slowly, each footfall creating harmonic chimes that filled the vast chamber with music. Tell me about Nexus Station, she said, stopping just outside the range of his chains. Alex's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his professional military demeanor. Nexus Station? That was 20 years ago. How could that possibly be relevant to? Answer the question, Zephyra commanded, though her tone carried curiosity rather than threat. Alex studied her face more carefully, and for a moment Zephyra wondered if he might recognize something familiar despite her transformation. I was stationed there as a security officer. Why do you want to know about ancient history? There was an incident, Zephyra continued, circling him slowly like a predator stalking prey, though her movements held more fascination than menace. Zentari assassins attacked an alien diplomat. A young woman. You intervened. The recognition hit Alex like a physical blow, his eyes widening as he stared at her with new understanding. That was you. Princess Zephyra of the Celestial Courts, she confirmed, stopping directly in front of him. Though I suspect you never learned my true identity at the time. You said you were a refugee, Alex said slowly, memory clearly returning to him. I thought you were just another alien trying to escape the violence on the Outer Rim. I never knew that you had saved the life of someone who would become your people's greatest enemy. Zephyra finished with bitter irony. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Alex looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since his capture, seeing past the royal regalia and crystalline enhancements to search for traces of the frightened young woman he'd once protected. You've changed. Ascension to the throne requires physical transformation, Zephyra explained, touching one of the jeweled implants that marked her divine authority. The person you saved ceased to exist the day I became queen. But you remember, Alex said, and something in his tone made Zephyra's carefully guarded heart skip a beat. I remember everything, she admitted, moving closer until she was well within the range of his restraints, demonstrating trust that would have seemed impossible between enemies. I remember how you refused any reward. How you made sure I reached safe passage to celestial space. How you risked your career to help someone you barely knew. Alex tested his chains experimentally, not to escape but seemingly to verify what Zephyra was offering him. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen. And the most frightened. I was barely more than a child, Zephyra said softly. Sent on my first diplomatic mission and nearly murdered for political convenience. If you hadn't been there, someone else would have helped, Alex replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. The galaxy was full of people who would have looked the other way rather than risk involvement in alien politics. No, Zephyra said firmly. You were the only one. The only person in that entire station who saw someone in need instead of a potential problem to avoid. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of 20 years and 3 years of warfare hanging between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. So what happens now? Alex asked finally. Do you execute me for old time's sake, or is this conversation going somewhere unexpected? Despite everything, Zephyra found herself smiling, the first genuine expression of joy she'd allowed herself in years. That depends, Captain Morrison. How do you feel about extended interrogations under comfortable conditions? That sounds suspiciously like you're planning to keep me alive, Alex observed. It sounds suspiciously like I'm planning to figure out what to do with the man who saved my life before I was old enough to understand what that meant, Zephyr corrected. Though I should warn you that my court expects results from these interrogations. You may need to provide me with some harmless intelligence to maintain appearances. Alex's smile matched her own, carrying the same warmth she remembered from their first meeting. I think I can manage that, Your Majesty. Though I have to ask, how many other human prisoners get private audiences with the Queen of the Celestial Dominion? Just one, Zephyr replied, already dreading the explanations she would have to provide to her advisors. And he's becoming a very complicated problem. As she signaled for the guards to escort Alex to quarters that would be far more comfortable than any prisoner had a right to expect, Zephyr wondered if she was making the wisest decision of her reign or the most catastrophically foolish. But looking into eyes that still held the same kindness that had saved her life 20 years ago, she found she didn't care about the consequences. Some debts, she reflected, were worth any price to repay. 3 days had passed since Zephyra's recognition of Alex Morrison, and what had begun as supposed interrogation sessions had evolved into something that would have scandalized her court if they knew the true nature of their conversations. Instead of extracting military secrets, she found herself sharing meals with him in chambers that bore no resemblance to standard prison facilities. The quantum resonance fields are what allow our ships to phase through solid matter, Alex was explaining between bites of celestial fruit that cost more than most humans earned in a year. Though I suspect you already know that, considering how effectively your fleets have been countering our tactical advantages. We've had 3 years to study captured human technology, Zephyr replied, though she appreciated his willingness to share information that maintained the pretense of interrogation. Your people's engineering is remarkably adaptive, even if it lacks the elegance of celestial design. They were dining in Zephyr's private chambers, a violation of protocol so severe that even suggesting it would have resulted in immediate censure from the Royal Council. But Zephyra had discovered that 20 years of wondering about the young man who saved her life had left her hungry for details that formal interrogation could never satisfy. Tell me about your career, Zephyra said, refilling his wine glass with liquid that sparkled like captured starlight. What happened after Nexus Station? Alex's expression grew thoughtful as he considered how much to reveal. Your rescue became part of my permanent record. Commendation for interspecies cooperation, fast-track promotion, assignment to the diplomatic corps. For years, I believed the galaxy was moving toward peaceful coexistence. What changed your mind? Zephyra asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The Proxima incident, Alex replied grimly. When the Colonial Senate voted to claim inhabited worlds by declaring their residents non-sentient. I spent 5 years fighting that policy from inside the military, trying to convince my superiors that expansion through conquest would inevitably lead to the kind of war we're fighting now. Zephyra felt a familiar pang of regret as she remembered her own failed attempts to prevent hostilities. I argued the same position before my own council. The younger nobles saw your people's expansion as an existential threat that required immediate military response. Were they wrong? Alex asked with the blunt honesty that had characterized their original meeting. No, Zephyra admitted. But neither were the humans who believed celestial technology posed a threat to human development. We were both right, and both wrong, and now millions of people on both sides are dead because we couldn't find a way to be right together. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime that indicated someone was requesting audience with the Queen. Zephyra activated the communication crystal with reluctance, knowing that any interruption to her private time with Alex would come loaded with political complications. Your Majesty, came the voice of Princess Lyanna, carrying barely concealed suspicion, Lord Commander Thane requests immediate audience regarding the interrogation of the human prisoner. Zephyra exchanged glances with Alex, both of them understanding that their extended private sessions had attracted unwanted attention. Inform the Lord Commander that I will meet with him in 1 hour. The interrogation is proceeding according to my instructions. Of course, Your Majesty, Lyanna replied, though her tone suggested she had additional questions that formal protocol prevented her from asking. Shall I inform him that you've made progress in extracting useful intelligence? You may inform him that Captain Morrison has provided valuable insights into human tactical thinking, Zephyra replied carefully. The full details will be included in my formal report. When the communication ended, Alex looked at her with amusement. Valuable insights into human tactical thinking? That's one way to describe dinner conversation. My advisors expect results, Zephyra said, moving to the window that overlooked her capital city's crystal spires. If I'm going to continue these meetings, I need to provide them with something that justifies the time investment. What if I actually gave you something useful? Alex suggested. Not strategic intelligence, but tactical information that might help your people minimize casualties during future engagements. Zephyra turned to study his face, searching for the motivation behind his offer. Why would you do that? Because, Alex said, joining her at the window, I've spent 3 years watching this war escalate beyond anything either side originally intended. If sharing some tactical doctrine helps end the fighting sooner, maybe fewer people die on both sides. The sincerity in his voice reminded Zephyra of the young security officer who had risked his career to help a frightened alien, and she felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with political calculation. That's not the only reason, she said quietly. Alex moved closer until they were standing side by side, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his human body heat. No, it's not. I keep thinking about the person you were 20 years ago. Scared, alone, trusting a stranger to help her survive. I want to help that person again, even if she's become the most powerful woman in the galaxy. That person doesn't exist anymore, Zephyra replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Doesn't she? Alex turned to face her directly, his brown eyes holding the same warmth she remembered from Nexus Station. Because when you smile, when you laugh at my terrible jokes about celestial wine, when you ask questions about my life like the answers actually matter to you, that's when I see her. Zephyra felt her carefully maintained royal composure wavering under his gaze. Alex, you don't understand the position this puts me in. If my court suspected that I was developing personal feelings for a human prisoner. Are you? Alex asked softly. Developing personal feelings? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Zephyra had spent 8 years learning to suppress personal desires in favor of political necessity, but standing here with the man who had shaped her understanding of what kindness looked like, she found those skills failing her. Yes, she admitted, the word carrying 20 years of wondering what might have been different if their first meeting had lasted longer. Alex reached toward her face, then stopped himself as he remembered their respective positions. May I? Zephyra nodded, unable to trust her voice as Alex's fingers traced the crystalline implants that marked her royal status. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if he were touching something precious rather than the marks of an alien enemy. You're still beautiful, he said quietly. Different, but still the most beautiful creature I've ever seen. Alex, Zephyra began, then stopped as the reality of their situation crashed over her. This is impossible. Even if I wanted to pursue whatever is happening between us, I'm the queen of the celestial dominion. I can't. I know, Alex said, his hand moving to cup her cheek. But knowing something is impossible doesn't make it go away. Before Zephyra could respond, the chamber's warning system activated, indicating that someone was approaching with urgent news. They separated quickly, both of them understanding that being discovered in such an intimate moment would have consequences neither could afford. Your Majesty. Lord Commander Thane's voice carried through the security barrier before he even entered the chamber. We've intercepted human communications indicating a massive fleet movement toward our outer colonies. We need to discuss defensive preparations immediately. Zephyra activated the entry protocols, allowing Thane into chambers where Alex stood with the carefully neutral expression of a prisoner awaiting his fate. What are the details? Intelligence suggests a coordinated assault on 3 star systems simultaneously, Thane replied, his gaze moving suspiciously between Zephyra and Alex. The attack patterns are too sophisticated for random strategic planning. They suggest inside knowledge of our defensive capabilities. The implication was clear, and Zephyra felt ice form in her veins as she realized how the situation would appear to her military commander. Extended private interrogations with a high-ranking human officer, followed immediately by evidence of a perfectly planned assault on celestial positions. Lord Commander, Zephyra said carefully, are you suggesting that intelligence has been compromised? I'm suggesting that we need to examine all possible sources of information leakage, Thane replied diplomatically. Including the unprecedented access that certain prisoners have been granted to sensitive locations. Alex stepped forward with the dignity Zephyra had come to associate with his character. Lord Commander, I give you my word as an officer that I have provided no intelligence to human forces since my capture. Your word, Thane said with the contempt that 3 years of warfare had bred between their species, carries exactly the weight one would expect from an enemy combatant. That's enough, Zephyra commanded, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance that made disobedience physically painful. Captain Morrison will be transferred to maximum security pending investigation of these allegations. I will conduct no further interrogations until the matter is resolved. As guards were summoned to escort Alex to proper detention facilities, he caught Zephyra's eyes for one last moment. In his gaze, she saw understanding, regret, and something that looked like farewell. Your Majesty, Alex said formally, thank you for your hospitality during my stay. Captain Morrison, Zephyra replied with equal formality, I hope we have the opportunity to conclude our discussions at a later date. It was a diplomatic nothing, meaningless words that carried no weight to observers but felt like a promise to both of them. As Alex was led away, Zephyra wondered if she had just saved both their lives by maintaining appropriate distance, or if she had made the greatest mistake of her reign by letting political necessity override the feelings she'd spent 20 years trying to forget. Either way, she suspected the consequences were only beginning. The Royal Council chamber hummed with tension that had been building for the 6 days since Alex Morrison had been transferred to maximum security detention. Zephyra sat upon the smaller judgment throne, facing an assembly of nobles who had grown increasingly vocal about her handling of human prisoners in general and one human prisoner in particular. Your Majesty, Lord Commander Thane reported with the grim satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had proven correct, our analysis of the human fleet movements confirms that they possess detailed knowledge of our defensive grid configurations. Information that could only have come from someone with access to classified strategic data. Princess Lyanna leaned forward from her position among the junior nobles, her expression carrying the righteous anger of youth. Sister, the implications are clear. This human has been feeding intelligence to his own people while enjoying unprecedented privileges as your personal prisoner. Zephyra maintained her regal composure even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, and she knew that her court was looking for any excuse to demand Alex's immediate execution. What they didn't know, what they could never know, was that she had been the one providing him with strategic information, hoping it might lead to faster resolution of the conflict. The evidence is concerning, Zephyra agreed carefully, but hardly conclusive. Human intelligence capabilities have improved significantly over the past 3 years. It's possible they obtained this information through other means. What other means? Demanded Lord Admiral Kresh, his ancient voice carrying the authority of someone who had served the crown for over a century. Your Majesty, we've maintained perfect operational security throughout this conflict. The only breach has been your decision to grant extended access to a high-ranking human officer. The accusation hung in the air like poison, and Zephyra felt the weight of 8 years on the throne pressing down on her shoulders. Every political instinct she developed told her to order Alex's execution immediately, demonstrating her loyalty to her people and ending any questions about her judgment. Perhaps, said a new voice from the chamber's entrance, we should ask the prisoner himself about these allegations. Princess Liona's smile could have frozen starlight as Alex Morrison was escorted into the chamber under heavy guard. 6 days in maximum security had left their mark, his face was gaunt from reduced rations, and his wrists bore the marks of restraints designed for beings with superhuman strength. But his bearing remained unbroken, and when his eyes met Zephyra's, she saw no accusation there, only understanding. "Captain Morrison," Zephyra said formally, "you stand accused of espionage and treason against the Celestial Dominion. How do you answer these charges?" Alex studied the assembled nobles with the same tactical assessment he'd once applied to hostile situations. "Your Majesty, I am guilty of being a human officer captured during legitimate military operations. Beyond that, I've committed no crimes against your people. Yet human forces have demonstrated knowledge that could only have come from classified celestial sources," Lord Commander Thane interjected. "Knowledge that you had the opportunity to access during your interrogations." "Did I?" Alex asked with genuine curiosity. "Because I recall our conversations covering human tactical doctrine, personal history, and the excellent quality of celestial wine. I don't remember being briefed on defensive grid configurations." Zephyra felt admiration mix with terror as she realized what Alex was doing. By maintaining that their conversations had been limited to harmless topics, he was protecting her from accusations of treason even at the cost of appearing guilty himself. "Your Majesty," Princess Liona said, rising from her position with the fluid grace that marked celestial nobility, "I request permission to address the prisoner directly." Zephyra nodded reluctantly, knowing that any attempt to protect Alex from questioning would only increase suspicions about her own loyalties. "Captain Morrison," Liona began with deceptive pleasantness, "you've been treated with remarkable consideration for an enemy prisoner. Comfortable quarters, fine food, private audiences with the Queen herself. Surely you felt some gratitude for such treatment." "I felt gratitude for being treated with basic dignity," Alex replied carefully. "A courtesy that appears to be unusual in your detention facilities. Grateful enough to repay such kindness with cooperation?" Liona pressed. "Perhaps by sharing insights that might help end this terrible war." Alex's gaze moved to Zephyra, and for a moment their eyes locked with the intensity of their first meeting 20 years ago. "I shared what I could without violating my oath as an officer. Personal observations, tactical theory, general strategic thinking. Nothing that would compromise active operations." It was the truth, technically, though both Alex and Zephyra knew it omitted crucial details about who had been sharing classified information with whom. "How convenient," Liona said with a smile that reminded Zephyra why their younger sister had always been considered the more ruthless of the royal siblings. "And I'm sure you'll be equally forthcoming about the communication device we discovered in your detention cell." Zephyra felt the world tilt beneath her throne as a guard produced a small crystalline device that she recognized with growing horror. It was a personal communication crystal, keyed to her specific harmonic frequency, capable of transmitting across interstellar distances without detection by standard security systems. "That's not possible," Zephyra said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Prisoners don't have access to royal communication crystals." Liona finished with triumph in her voice. "No, they don't. Unless someone provided one." The chamber erupted in voices as nobles realized the implications. A royal crystal could only be activated by someone of the blood, which meant either Zephyra or Liona had given Alex the means to communicate with human forces. "Sister," Liona continued with mock concern, "surely you don't suspect me of providing communication devices to human prisoners?" Zephyra felt the trap closing around her with the precision of a military operation. Liona had orchestrated this entire confrontation, probably planting the crystal herself and timing its discovery for maximum political impact. The younger princess had always resented Zephyra's ascension to the throne, and now she had found the perfect weapon to force her sister's abdication. "The crystal is a plant," Alex said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos with calm certainty. "Princess Liona placed it in my cell to create evidence of treason where none existed." The accusation silenced the chamber instantly. To accuse a member of the royal family of fabricating evidence was tantamount to declaring war on the entire political structure of the Dominion. You dare? Lyanna hissed, her composure finally cracking. You dare accuse me of deception to protect whatever pathetic arrangement you've made with my sister? I don't need to protect anything, Alex replied, turning to address the entire chamber. Because Queen Zephyra has done nothing wrong. If you want to execute me for espionage, do it. But don't use manufactured evidence to destroy the reputation of the finest ruler your people have ever had. Alex, don't, Zephyra whispered, knowing that his defense of her would only make the situation worse. Your Majesty, Alex said formally, as if they were meeting for the first time, I request the right of trial by combat according to ancient celestial law. The chamber fell silent as nobles processed what Alex had just requested. Trial by combat was an archaic tradition, rarely invoked in modern times, but still legally binding under celestial law. If granted, Alex could face a champion in single combat, with his guilt or innocence determined by the outcome. That is your right, Zephyra said slowly, understanding what he was offering her. But as the accused, you may face any champion the crown chooses to designate. I understand, Alex replied, and through his eyes Zephyra saw a message meant for her alone. Trust me. Very well, Zephyra said, rising from her throne with decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I invoke the ancient rights. Captain Morrison will face trial by combat at tomorrow's dawn. And who, Lord Commander Thane asked, will serve as the crown's champion? Zephyra looked out over the assembled nobles, then at her sister's triumphant expression, then finally at Alex Morrison, the man who had saved her life 20 years ago and was now offering to sacrifice his own to protect her throne. I will, Zephyra declared, sending shockwaves through the chamber. As is my right as sovereign, I will serve as my own champion in this matter. The implications were staggering. If Alex won, he would go free and she would be honor-bound to abdicate. If Zephyra won, Alex would die and she would have proven her loyalty to her people beyond question. It was a gambit that offered only the slimmest chance of survival for either of them. Sister, Lyanna said with barely concealed glee, are you certain? Combat with a desperate human could be dangerous. I'm certain, Zephyra replied, her gaze never leaving Alex's face. We end this tomorrow, one way or another. As the chamber emptied and Alex was led back to his cell, Zephyra remained on her throne, staring at the communication crystal that had doomed them both. In less than 24 hours, she would face the man she loved in combat that could only end with one of them dead. It was, she reflected grimly, either the most romantic gesture in galactic history or the stupidest decision she'd ever made as queen. Possibly both. Dawn broke over the crystal arena with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed designed by the universe for momentous occasions. Zephyra stood at the edge of the ancient combat circle, wearing ceremonial armor that had been forged for her coronation and never used in actual battle. Around the arena, thousands of celestials filled the viewing platforms, while orbital broadcasts carried the proceedings to every corner of the Dominion. Across the arena, Alex Morrison waited with the calm dignity that had characterized their every interaction. The guards had provided him with traditional combat gear, lightweight armor that offered protection without restricting movement, and a ceremonial blade that gleamed with the same crystalline properties as celestial technology. He looked like a warrior from ancient legends, despite being armed for a fight he had virtually no chance of winning. Your Majesty, Princess Lyanna said from her position in the royal viewing box, it's still not too late to designate a champion in your place. Lord Commander Thane would be honored to. No, Zephyra said firmly, checking the balance of her own ceremonial sword. I invoke the ancient rights. I'll honor them completely. What Zephyra didn't tell her sister was that she had spent the entire night studying the legal precedents surrounding trial by combat, searching for loopholes that might allow both combatants to survive. What she discovered had given her hope, though the plan required perfect coordination and a level of trust that went beyond anything rational. The ritual horn sounded across the arena, calling the combatants to their positions. Zephyra walked to the center of the crystal circle with the measured pace that royal protocol demanded, while Alex approached from the opposite side with military precision. When they stood face to face in the arena's center, she could see her own determination reflected in his eyes. By the ancient laws of the celestial dominion, the arena marshal proclaimed, "Let this combat determine truth. Victory to the righteous, honor to the fallen." The traditional blessing echoed across the arena as both combatants drew their blades and assumed fighting stances. For a moment, Zephyra allowed herself to remember the frightened princess and the young security officer who had first met 20 years ago, before duty and circumstance had made them enemies. "Alex," she said quietly, her words meant for him alone, "do you trust me?" "With my life," Alex replied, raising his sword in the formal salute that preceded combat. The fight that followed was unlike any trial by combat in celestial history. Both warriors moved with skill and precision, their blades meeting in patterns that looked choreographed despite being entirely spontaneous. Zephyra fought with the enhanced speed and strength that marked her species, while Alex countered with human adaptability and tactical thinking. But as the combat progressed, something remarkable began to happen. Their movements became increasingly synchronized, as if they were dancing rather than fighting. When Zephyra attacked, Alex's defense was already in position. When Alex pressed an offensive, Zephyra's counter was perfectly timed. The crowd began to murmur as they witnessed something unprecedented, two combatants fighting with perfect coordination despite being mortal enemies. "They're not trying to kill each other," someone whispered in the viewing stands. The observation was accurate. Despite the lethal nature of their weapons and the stakes of their combat, both Zephyra and Alex were fighting with restraint that bordered on cooperation. Their blades met with force that rang across the arena, but neither combatant pressed attacks that would result in serious injury. After 20 minutes of combat that resembled a deadly ballet, both warriors simultaneously stepped back and lowered their weapons. The crowd fell silent as they realized what was happening. Both combatants were refusing to continue the fight. "I yield," Zephyra said clearly, her voice carrying across the arena. "I yield," Alex echoed simultaneously. The arena marshal looked confused as he consulted the ancient law books, searching for precedent that covered mutual surrender. The crowd's murmur grew to a roar as nobles debated what the simultaneous yielding meant under celestial law. "Your Majesty," the marshal called out finally, "the ancient codes provide no guidance for this situation. What is your ruling?" Zephyra sheathed her sword and walked to the center of the arena, where Alex joined her. Together, they stood before the assembled thousands who had come to witness either execution or vindication. "Citizens of the Dominion," Zephyra began, her voice enhanced by the arena's acoustics, "you came here expecting to see justice through combat. What you have witnessed instead is something far more important, proof that cooperation serves us better than conflict." She gestured toward Alex, who stood beside her with quiet dignity despite his status as prisoner and accused traitor. 20 years ago, this man saved my life when I was merely Princess Zephyra, stranded and alone on a neutral station. He asked for no reward, expected no recognition, and never knew the true identity of the alien he helped. His act of kindness shaped my understanding of what leadership should represent. The crowd's murmur shifted as people began to understand the implications of what their queen was revealing. Today, Captain Morrison offered to die rather than allow manufactured evidence to destroy the reputation of someone he barely knew, Zephyra continued. He demanded trial by combat not to prove his innocence, but to protect the integrity of the crown itself. Princess Liana rose from her seat in the viewing box, her face pale with the recognition that her carefully planned coup was collapsing. "Sister, you can't possibly." "I can and I will," Zephyra interrupted, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance that made disobedience physically uncomfortable. "The evidence against Captain Morrison was fabricated by someone who sought to use this trial to destabilize the throne. Someone who placed a royal communication crystal in his cell and then arranged for its convenient discovery. The accusation sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles as they realized what the queen was implying. Zephyra pulled out a second communication crystal, identical to the one that had damned Alex, and held it up for the crowd to see. This crystal, she announced, carries Princess Liona's harmonic signature. It was removed from Captain Morrison's cell by palace security at my request, after I discovered that the evidence against him had been planted by my own sister. Liona's composure finally shattered completely as guards moved to surround her viewing box. "You're lying. You're both traitors to our people." "No," Alex said, speaking for the first time since the combat ended, "we're trying to save both our peoples from a war that's destroying everyone it touches." He turned to address the crowd directly, his military bearing commanding attention even from those who saw him as an enemy. "I've spent 3 years fighting this war, and I've learned something that both sides need to understand: we're more alike than we are different. We both value honor, protect our families, and want our children to inherit something better than perpetual conflict." "The human speaks truth," came a voice from the crowd. Lord Admiral Kresh, ancient and respected enough that his words carried weight throughout the Dominion. "I have studied their military doctrine for 3 years. They fight with honor, even when we do not extend the same courtesy." Other voices began to rise from the crowd as Zephyra's revelation and Alex's words sparked discussions that had been suppressed by years of warfare. Citizens began to question whether the conflict was truly necessary, whether peace might be possible, whether the future belonged to those who chose cooperation over conquest. "Your Majesty," came a new voice from the arena's communication system, "this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation. I'm speaking from the bridge of the TFS Resolution, currently holding position at the edge of your system." Zephyra felt her heart skip as she realized that Alex's capture had been part of a larger plan. "Admiral Chen, you're in violation of celestial space." "I'm here," Admiral Chen replied, "because Captain Morrison contacted me 3 days ago with a proposal for ending this war. He suggested that your trial by combat might provide the perfect opportunity for both sides to witness what cooperation looks like instead of conflict." The pieces fell into place as Zephyra understood what had really happened. Alex hadn't been feeding intelligence to human forces, he'd been arranging for peace negotiations while protecting her from accusations of treason. "Captain Morrison," Zephyra said quietly, "you've been planning this." "Someone had to," Alex replied with the same gentle determination she remembered from their first meeting. "We're both too stubborn to surrender, and too honorable to let innocent people keep dying for our pride." The formal peace negotiations that followed took place in the same arena where they had fought, with representatives from both species witnessing discussions that shaped the framework for lasting cooperation. Zephyra and Alex served as co-negotiators, their shared combat serving as a symbol of how former enemies could choose to work together rather than destroy each other. 6 months later, they stood together in the same arena for their wedding ceremony, attended by representatives from dozens of worlds who had come to witness the union that formally ended the war between their peoples. Princess Liona, pardoned but stripped of her succession rights, served as a reluctant witness to her sister's happiness. "You know," Alex said as they exchanged vows that combined human and celestial traditions, "when I helped a scared alien princess 20 years ago, I never imagined it would lead to this." "I knew," Zephyra replied, her smile radiant enough to power star systems. "From the moment you chose to help someone who needed it, I knew you were the kind of person the galaxy needed more of." Their kiss, broadcast across both civilizations, marked not just their personal union but the beginning of an era where cooperation replaced conflict as the defining characteristic of interstellar relations. The young security officer who had once saved a princess had grown into the man who helped save 2 civilizations from destroying each other. As they stood together before thousands of witnesses, Zephyr reflected that some recognitions were worth waiting 20 years for, especially when they led to futures that neither species could have built alone.